So let me start by narrating my vegan journey.
Yes.
I grew up eating meat. I grew up in the United States, and when my father first moved there in the late 1960s, and then my mother in the early 1970s, even though many people in the US are vegan today, the dominant culture at the time was meat eating. And so they're Gujarati, I'm Gujarati, and we traditionally are vegetarian. But after moving to the US, my father started eating meat. And so I also grew up eating meat. My brother and sister grew up eating meat. And it was only when I was about 16 years old and I went on a school field trip, and we stopped at a food court. And my friend, she went to get something vegetarian from somewhere, and I went to get a chicken burger from McDonald's. And then we sat back at the table, and she said, "Are you really going to eat that?" And I was defensive at the time, and I said, "Of course I am," and that kind of thing. But it made me think, for the first time, that my goodness, I'm eating an animal. Even though my mother is vegetarian, I saw that as cultural, religious. It was only when someone pointed out the ethics to me that I understood, and I started making a change in my life. So I became vegetarian at 16, and then vegan by the time I was 20, after having learned about the violence that's also in egg production and in dairy production. So that was one part of the reason why I stopped eating animals. Another reason was because I met a turkey called Alice. And Alice was a turkey who lived at the Poplar Hill Sanctuary in Washington, D.C. It's a sanctuary for rescued animals rescued from the meat, egg, and dairy industry. And I had never met animals like turkeys or chickens doing what turkeys and chickens should do, live as they want to. But when I went to the sanctuary, Alice was so curious. She came right up to greet me. I had a mirrored Indian bag on my arm, and she was, really looking to see what that is. I knelt down so that she could see it better. She was so curious, and she had such a personality to her. And I had no idea that when you pet turkeys, they actually purr like cats. And all the other animals at the sanctuary were so busy. We had chickens over there taking dust baths, a curious goat who was following us around. And I thought, these are individuals. They're unique individuals. They don't all have the same personality. Not all chickens are the same. Not all goats are the same. They're unique just like us. And so that really solidified my decision to stop eating animals. And now my whole family no longer eats animals either. So that's the short version of my journey to veganism.
Wonderful, wonderful. I would extend the same thing by narrating my own journey. So when I was in the college campus, IIT Delhi campus, it was in 95 or 96, I read a Hindi story. It was the biography of a calf. And right from the moment it is born, in fact the story starts even before the calf is born, the way the mother, the cow, is inseminated, and then how it grows up, how it is castrated, then how it is yoked to work in the fields, and then how it is ultimately sold off to the slaughterhouse. So I read that story, and a long story. And then I quit milk. So that was 96 or 96. And then as long as I remained in the campus, I simply didn't take any milk. However, once I moved out and I started working for a few years in corporate, paneer returned. So did a bit of butter. Then fast forward to 2012-13. I've had a lot of rescued rabbits living with me. So when I began with the Bodh shivers, which are spiritual tours, I would take participants to the hills. And there they would spend 3 days or a week with me reading scriptures and such things. And there often we would find the villagers keeping some animals in captivity for some reason. So sometimes we would just pay off the villagers and get the animals released into the wild. And sometimes it was just not possible to release them back because we knew that they are no more capable of surviving on their own, having lived in captivity for long. So mainly rabbits. And then those rabbits would be somehow packed and secured in cartons or something, anything we could arrange right there on the hills and brought to live with us where we stayed. It was a small place back then, but I think the rabbits were happy sharing space with us there. So, and that thing continues. Even today with me, 6 or 8 rabbits are living. Though now the place is far more spacious and they have an entire lawn and a lot of grass dedicated to them and a good bunny home.
Yeah.
But at that time it was a small place and the rabbits were sharing space with us. So one of the rabbits, she had a problem in her leg.
Okay.
So her feet had no hair. So she couldn't properly move. And the rabbits need to jump, and their hind legs are where they extract most of their power from. And that's where she had a problem. So she couldn't jump. But she could move, but not really the way rabbits do. We showed her to a lot of vets, and they simply suggested euthanizing her. They said there is pain and there is no way this condition can be corrected. So just let her go. I said no. So I asked for the treatment. There was no cure, but there was treatment. The treatment was to apply the cream, the medicine daily, and bandage her daily. So I would do that. But because she was not moving that much, probably her digestion suffered. And because she was not moving around that much, so she was not mingling with other rabbits that much. So she would stay with me constantly. And this was my table, my work table, and here would be my laptop. And Nandu would be sitting on her cushion next to my laptop, just looking at me. And I would be working and she would be here. And if I'm typing something, then she would simply stretch herself and lick my hand. We know cats and dogs to do that.
Right.
We don't know that rabbits too do that. And it was very, very human-like affection.
Yeah.
Hardly a relationship between two different species.
Right.
And then such were the times that I used to sleep right next to where I used to work. There was a special spiritual period in my journey. So I would work and then I would sleep right next to that place on the floor. And then everybody would be gone in the night. And then around midnight, when there was nobody around, there would be these gentle footsteps, and I would know Nandu is coming. And she had nobody else to play with. So she would come, and I'm lying, and she would simply then sit on my stomach, my chest, and do her thing, and I would fall asleep. So it had kind of developed into a cute and strange love story between me and that little kid. And as I said, her digestion, because she was not moving around that much, that was suffering. And she stopped eating. It was a very painful period. We tried everything, she would just not eat. Her stomach had bloated, and it's a special condition in rabbits where they feel they are already full because there is a bloat, and then they don't eat. And on the fourth day, right in my arms, she expired. And I cried like a child for several days. Even to this day, I just feel a bit angry at myself at not being able to save her. And then 2 or 3 days after that, there was this movie I was watching, Ship of Theseus. And it had footage of animals in labs. And one of the footages had a rabbit being experimented upon in a cruel way, obviously, as happens in the labs. And that rabbit looked very much the same as Nandu. And it was at that moment, sitting there in the theater, that I quit everything. It was effortless. It just happened. And that day and this day, I'm a vegan, and I'm glad I'm humbly been able to, I think, inspire a lot of people, a few lakh people at least, to give up on animal cruelty. That's how it all happened. A pretty longish introduction to the whole thing.
Well, that's an amazing story, and I think a lot of people have stories of how either Nandu or an Alice open their eyes to animals, and how they're so much like us, more than they're different from us. We have eyes, they have eyes. We have ears, they have ears. We have a heart, they have a heart. They feel joy and pain and jealousy and guilt and all of the same feelings and emotions that we do. Even rats. We at PETA, we recently rescued over 150 rats and mice from Jitmar, where they were being experimented on illegally. And rats and mice can be so loving when they get to know you and when they trust you. Just like Nandu, they come right up to you, they want to play. If you tickle them, they giggle. And, like all living beings, They just want to feel safe, and they just want to feel loved. And I think what this reminds us of is that we do so many horrible things to animals because we consider them to be other. We consider them to be different. And we focus solely on the differences in order to justify cutting them into pieces, putting them in cages so small that they can't even move or turn around, or that their muscles atrophy, suffocating them, all of the things that we do to animals for things we don't even need. I mean, for either a fleeting moment of taste or to turn their skin into a belt. I mean, these are frivolous kinds of things. We don't need to do that. And I think we can understand that it's wrong if we compare it to other things that we recognize to be wrong. For example, racism or sexism. These are also things that were based on oppressing someone you consider to be an other. And similarly, speciesism is another wrong kind of ism, where we put other species, we are cruel to other species simply on the basis that they're not our species. And we also use so many of the same kinds of justifications for being cruel to animals that we once did for being cruel to people of other races. Men used to use the same kind of justifications for being cruel to women, that, you're not as smart as me, you're not as powerful as me, I'm able to do this. And we recognize those things now as completely flawed, not true at all. And similarly, animals we now know so much more about them today than we did yesterday. We know that they're intelligent, and it is really wrong to compare their intelligence with ours because they do so many things that we can't do. And they are intelligent in ways that they require to live in their environment, just as we are. So, we can't always look at them and compare them to human intelligence because it's not fair. They are so much more intelligent and capable than us in many ways,
in their own context.
In their own context. We can't navigate from one continent to another
right.
Without maps and without great technology, but birds can.
Right. You see, this otherness, the basis of this otherness is body identification. The woman is other to the man because her body is different. The black is the other to the white because his body is different. Similarly, the bodies of other species are obviously very different from those of our own. So this feeling of otherness, and the more we identify with our body, the more everybody will be an other. Even the father will be another, the mother will be another, the husband or the wife is bound to be another because their bodies are not ours. And by the same yardstick, coming from the same center, animals are very distantly others. My neighbor is an other. The body is different. The animal is so far away. And when the animal is so far away, one doesn't feel any commonness or similarity. It is impossible for us to have a feeling of otherness and yet show compassion. It cannot practically happen. So the common ground has to be searched. What is common between us and the animals? And the commonness is in consciousness. It is consciousness that we share with all human beings and also with all other sentient species. But for me to say that consciousness is what I share with a rabbit or a rat or a turkey, I must first identify myself primarily with my consciousness and not with my body. You see, if I'm a body, and let's say, look at me, if I'm a male body, I'll be forced to look at a woman as the other, because the body is simply so different. But if I can keep my body aside for a while, not that I leap out of my body or something, just give it not the primary kind of importance. If I take myself as consciousness primarily, then it is possible to relate to the black, the white, the Chinese, the old, the young, the kid, the man, the woman, everybody. Because consciousness has no color. Consciousness has no height, no form, no shape, no boundaries actually. And when that realization comes, then compassion is a natural companion. It does happen. So, when we talk of something like species identification, speciesism, as you said, the fundamental reason is body identification. And it's curious that the same body identification is also responsible for all the evils that are plaguing mankind today and are leading to the devastation we have wrought on ourselves in the form of climate change. Yeah. The more I am the body, the more I can do anything to please the body. Right? I can burn fossil fuel, I can have a lot of animal farming, I can continuously allow or force species to go extinct because I am ruining their habitat. I'm converting more and more jungles into farmland, arable land, and because I want more food. I want more food so that I can have more food, and the animals I want to slaughter can have more food and eventually get slaughtered. Why? So that the body gets pleasure. Mm-hmm. The more I think of myself as the body, the more violent I would be. So all wisdom literature points towards body identification as the root cause of all violence, and also body identification as the root ignorance. Mm-hmm. So that's the fundamental wrong knowledge, a wrong notion that I am the body. If I am the body, I'm bound to be violent. And violent towards everybody, including me. Obviously, how will I spare animals? Mm-hmm. So the attitude that we have towards animals is just a reflection of our inner ignorance towards ourselves. Mm-hmm. We do not know who we are, so we take ourselves as this. We do not know who we are, we take ourselves as this, and therefore we are violent towards everybody else. Mm-hmm. Because this is limited, and anything outside of this is the other. Anything outside of this skin sack is the other. Mm-hmm. Now, if the other is the other and this is who I am, then to what extent can I be related to the other? I am fundamentally related, permanently wedded to the stuff inside this skin sack. And that's where it all comes from. What alarms me it was very interesting, your vegan story, when you said that you're initially vegetarian because you came from a Gujarati traditional background, and there people are generally vegetarian. Most people who are vegetarian today, especially in India, are vegetarian not because they understand. They are vegetarian because of cultural or traditional reasons. And that's the reason why when, let's say, a boy from traditionally vegetarian family, typically a Brahmin or a Jain family, goes out to the campus, let's say he gets admission in an engineering college and he's now staying in a hostel, it takes him not more than 2 or 4 months to take to meat, because that's what peer influence and peer pressure do to him. And that kind of thing does not long, because it is not coming from wisdom. Tradition, culture, ethics, if they are not coming from understanding, they cannot last. And I would like to think that is also the fundamental challenge the vegan movement faces today. Lack of understanding. Why must one turn vegan? Because the argument is not spontaneous, not obvious. When we counsel someone, please turn vegan, please don't be cruel to animals, they'll have something to say about their choices. Not everybody will quickly agree or understand. And then the argument coming from the vegan side is ethically very strong, but then ethics can be something personal. Somebody may not agree with ethics. Ethics cannot be absolute. Ethical codes, as we know, vary across ages, continents, people, cultures. Right. So the pace of the whole thing remains slow, because we do not see that it's not so much about animals, it's about us. I am not right, therefore I am cruel to animals. I am not right within, that's the reason I am cruel to animals. And if I am cruel to animals, there will be so much, my cruelty towards animals is proof that there will be so much that is wrong in my personal life as well. Now when that relationship becomes obvious, it becomes important, rather unavoidable for people to listen. So if we could bring wisdom at the center of veganism, rather than ethics or even compassion, then probably we might see greater success. Because the compassion that we talk of is mostly an ethical, moral thing. When we say, well, you should be compassionate, it's more of a moral thing, a moral sound it has. Please be compassionate. Please don't be cruel. Now the why and the where and the whom is not absolutely clear in this, but surely there is a moral authority when we say, please be compassionate. That sounds good, but does not necessarily work, because people are selfish. And that's not an allegation, that's how we all are. We all care for our self-interest. Can we display it to them that it is not a matter of ethics that you display towards others? It is not a matter of your ethical disposition towards others. It's a matter of your inner health. It's a matter of your own life. Please be better within. And then you find that veganism becomes simply inevitable. You have to be a vegan. I look at the vegan community, and I have been in close touch with a a lot of vegans, and I really admire the work they are doing in very adverse circumstances. There is a lot in India especially that is harsh on vegan activists, and they work against all odds. I know of a few rescue operations that involved personal risk. I've met those people, I've heard of them. So they're all good people, very nice people. If they could somehow also develop that core of understanding who we are, and therefore what our relationship with the entire world, including the animal world, should be.
I think you raise you've raised so many interesting points in what you've said. And I think we see evidence of not being right inside, because it spills over not only into how you treat animals, but into how you treat other people, how you treat the planet. Now there's not so much of this research that is compiled in India, but abroad they are finding that people who are cruel to animals, who've committed crimes against animals, often move on to committing crimes against human beings. There's, so much documentation in those countries where people who harm their spouses have often harmed the dogs in their house first. Serial killers, school shooters, the majority of them have a history of cruelty to animals. They practiced with animals first. They didn't learn that that was wrong, and they extended that self-misery, you could say, onto somebody else. And that goes on and on and on. And we've even sort of seen that even in a slaughterhouse setting or a laboratory setting, where people become desensitized to the cruelty. And in so many of our investigations, the kind that you spoke about, we've seen that in addition to the cruelty that's already taking place, that's inherent at the factory farm or at the slaughterhouse, a lot of times the workers are being even more cruel to the animals. That they are in a laboratory setting, they may start by first being cruel to a rat, and then they escalate that cruelty to then onto other animals, even more severe cruelty, even more painful procedures. And it's that not being right inside that is making things worse and worse as things go on. More victims, new species of victims, even more severe cruelty, because it's not being stopped. Nobody is addressing it with those people. Nobody has perhaps pointed it out to them, what the core problem is. And it's the same type of thing for the environment. If we see the planet as ours to take from, if we see animals as ours to use for any type of pleasure, I mean, you spoke about pleasure, but the pleasure really, how long does it last? When we eat an animal, the so-called pleasure, it lasts for a few seconds on our tongue. That's it. This animal has suffered from birth unto death for a few seconds on our tongue. Or if we turn that animal into a wallet, how much pleasure is this wallet really bringing to you?
But if you look at it from the perspective of a pleasure seeker, he says, you are very right. I understand the pleasure that I get from it is momentary, doesn't last. But what do I do? Because we have a consciousness that seeks freedom from misery. Beautifully you put it, that we are all miserable within and that same misery spills over to the rest of the world. Beautifully put. We are indeed miserable within. And that misery is there right from the start. I've seen kids, like 1 year old, and that kid, there is a procession of ants going towards the tree. You would have seen red ants going towards the tree and climbing, and it's a huge procession. It's like what, 20 meters long or something. You can. And the kid is actually peeing on the procession. And he is taking this as good fun. So the kid is standing, the kid is 1 or 2 years old, barely able to walk. And he is moving and peeing on the procession and enjoying the fact that the ants are getting killed. So the seeds of violence are there in us right since birth. That misery that we are talking about. And because we are miserable, so we seek freedom from misery. We do not know how that freedom will be achieved, because we are not only miserable, we are also ignorant. We are miserable and we are ignorant, so we do not know how to get freedom from that misery, so we seek pleasure. Now, I am continuously feeling that misery within, continuously. I am a common man. I want freedom from that, so I seek pleasure. Even if I get momentary pleasure from, let's say, the taste of meat, I go for it. The pleasure does not last. After a few minutes, then I run towards something else, and that's the entire life of the average individual, running from pleasure to pleasure for 80 years continuously, being dissatisfied at all points and still not losing hope. And probably that's why hope happens to be such an important word in all cultures. If there is no misery, there is no need for hope. If misery could be brought to a permanent end, again there is no need for hope. We fully well know that any relief from misery is just ephemeral. Misery returns, and therefore you have to continuously keep hoping. And that's why people win elections, talking of US, on the word hope. Hope, let's hope. So you go to a meat eater, or you go to any kind of an average debauched person, and you tell him, you're not getting anything from it. He will say, better something than nothing. Either give me complete relief from misery, or let me have what I want to have. Now what is happening is that it's the consciousness within that's miserable right since birth. The moment we are born, we cry aloud. The child is wailing all the time. And the child, because of ignorance, I said we are miserable, we are ignorant. Because of ignorance, is also tied to the body. The child takes itself as the body. When I have to point at myself, I say, come to me, here I am. So the body is who I am. So I am miserable and I am the body. So how do I remove my misery? Using the body. So then I give myself bodily pleasures to get rid of my inner misery. The misery is inside. The body is not miserable. You see, I might be very sad, very tense, very depressed. Does that make my knees ache? No, it does not. My nose is all right. My eyes are all right. I can hear properly, and yet I am miserable within. So the body is not a participant in the misery. The body is not contributing to the misery. But because I feel I am the body, so to get relief from the misery, I use my body. And how do I use my body? By rushing after all kinds of bodily pleasures. Meat eating being one, exploiting animals being one, all kinds of things that we do. Because we do not know any other way. So one could say, and justifiably so, that we are not really evil, we are just stupid. And all evil is just stupidity. We do not know how to get rid of our inner condition of suffering. So we do all the nonsense and wickedness that we do to ourselves and to the world. Could we somehow could we somehow bring this out to the people that I know you are cruel because you are miserable, but being cruel won't help you out of your misery. There are other ways possible. If we could display the other ways to them, there would hardly be any need to harm and hurt and destroy everybody else the way we do. We do not see any other option. I'm being told killing a rabbit is bad. I'll probably agree. Everybody would agree. There is the rabbit. You show the rabbit and say, it's bad to kill that rabbit or hurt that rabbit. Who would not agree? The next day you find that person feasting on the same rabbit. What's happening? He was not being dishonest when he agreed. He agreed it's bad. But by the time it is the next day, his own inner incompleteness and misery have overpowered him. He is just feeling that vacuum within and he does not know how to fill it up. So he says, okay, bring it on, serve it on the table, the rabbit. And that's what is happening. I also see a worrying trend of people retreating from veganism. They become vegans because they understand to an extent what is being said, at least intellectually they understand. And then they go back to their usual ways. That's a small number. I don't know, maybe 10%, 20%. That also might be temporary. Like they become vegan, then they revert, and then they again might.
Yeah.
So all that is because as human beings, we are simply not good within. In spite of all the technological progress and all the knowledge that we have and the economic powers, we are far more affluent, prosperous today than any other time in history. The per capita income of the world as a whole is many times higher than what it used to be in the 19th century, than in the 17th century, previous centuries. The means of communications are so very advanced. Even the ordinary man will be able to think of leaping into space probably within a few decades. Look at medical science. The average lifespan today is close to 80 years. If you look at Europe or US, it's nearing 85, 90. We are doing wonderfully well when it comes to the material things, the bodily and the gross things. It is the subtle inner world that is still in despair. And it is because of that despair that we are hurting and harming everybody. Actually, the inner child is saying, I'm not happy. And if I'm not happy, why should I let anybody be happy?
And a lot of people, are addicted to these foods. They're addicted to the cheese and they're addicted to the milk. But there's good news about that. They say that you can break these addictions in just about a month's time. It doesn't take more than that. And I always tell people that when you're trying to go vegan, okay, if you fall off the wagon and you have ice cream or something one day, keep going. Don't go all the way back. Don't say, oh, I can't do it now. Keep going, because it really only takes 1 month. And a lot of people are really almost vegan already. So many of the foods that we have, the sabzis and the dals, and these are all usually vegan. So it's really not such a huge jump to drop the paneer or to drop the cream. These are small changes. And especially nowadays, we don't even have to drop it. We have the oat milks and we have the vegan yogurts and the vegan ice creams, which all taste the same. But what you were saying about, inner happiness, I find that, when I started going vegan, and I've heard this from so many people, that you almost instantly start feeling healthier. I never have to go to the doctor. And you hear people who've had heart disease or who've had diabetes, essentially reverse these conditions through eating plants. And it's also, you feel a sense of control, self-control in your life, I think, by being in charge of what you're doing, deliberately eating, deliberately not hurting others. Whereas if you're eating meat and if you're just going through the whims and fancies of your fleeting desires, I think you can really feel a lack of control. You can feel out of control. And that's another benefit of eating vegan, being a disciplined eater, someone who lives in a disciplined manner and tries to be as compassionate as possible. We can't control everything. If we're walking down the street, we might accidentally step on an ant. We wouldn't deliberately step on an ant, but we may accidentally do so. So it's not about perfection. It's about doing your best. And if you do your best, from people I've spoken to, they start feeling happier. There's, those feelings of misery, those feelings of, trying to fill a void, really start going away.
Well said. I would just extend this thing, you see. Obviously, there is a strong vegan argument when it comes to physical health. It is obvious. You feel better. In fact, you get rid of a few ailments just by dropping dairy and meat, obviously. You also lose weight. People have lost a few good kgs within a month or so the day they turn vegan. So all that is definitely there. Your heart feels better. I'm talking about the physical heart. So obviously there are health benefits to veganism, but then there can be counter arguments also, and there are strong counter arguments. People talk of B12, vitamin D, calcium, iron, so many things, protein, so many things. Obviously those arguments are flawed, and we can refute them sitting right here. We can talk of alternate sources of protein, of B12, of many things. When it comes to true inner health, when it comes to the argument arising from consciousness, you know what we say? We say, even if it hurts my health, even if it hurts my health, why should I harm someone else? Even if I have to die starving, why will I kill somebody else? So obviously when we talk of the health benefits of veganism, the physical health benefits, I too talk of them and I've experienced them. So I can quite credibly talk of those health benefits. But in my mind, it has to be principally another argument. Life is anyway not unlimited. Mm-hmm. You live for 80 years maybe. It's okay to live for 60, 70 if you have to lose 10 years of your life. If you have to, you don't have to. But suppose if you have to. But live healthily, live in a way that has dignity. What is the point in extending my life at the cost of little animals? I mean, look at the chicken, the hen, the cock, the rabbit, even the goat, the sheep. How does my sense of inner dignity allow me to have a great and healthy looking body and wonderful strong bones and glowing skin at the cost of the life of that little rabbit? I mean, is it not indignified? Is it not indignified? When it comes to this argument, I found practically this shuts down all other arguments. Otherwise, there is a whole lot of literature today on the internet, for example, that talks of people suffering neural diseases because they went vegan, and the woman was pregnant and vegan, so the child suffered because she was not taking enough B12 and all. All that is obviously false. And there are obvious and simple and easy, straightforward ways to take care of your vitamin D and B12 needs and all those things. No issues at all. We in the foundation are all vegan. Most of us do not even need any supplements.
No.
Some of us do at times, and then we take those supplements. It's all there are organic supplements available, not expensive either, so it's not difficult at all. But I suppose the final argument should be, even if my own health were to suffer, I am still not going to touch the chicken, full stop. There is a life there, there is a life here. To prolong my life, I am not going to cut short her life. And if this be so, the discussion is concluded. Then that person cannot say much beyond this. And it sounds impractical, but believe me, it works.
Well, I mean, I think that's a beautiful sentiment. I mean, for me, the health is certainly secondary. It's a benefit because, there's studies that show that vegans live longer, that we're healthier, that we don't suffer from all of these lifestyle ailments to the degree that meat eaters do, and so on. And there's the whole documentary, The Game Changers, about how athletes benefit from eating vegan. And you talked about body consciousness and how, we are so aware of our own bodies. And there is one body part that I encourage people to focus on when it comes to animals, and it's their eyes. Because if you see a pig's eyes looking back out at you from a truck where she's on her way to slaughter, you will see a person in there. There is a person behind there, and if you look into a chicken's eyes, you will recognize, you will forget the difference between our body and their body, because you will see in her eyes that she's got feelings and she is scared, and that she doesn't want to die any more than you or I do. And so, if ever in doubt, look into the animal's eyes. You will know everything you need to know by doing that, by looking into the animal's eyes.
Beautifully put, lovely. Yes. The only problem is most people do not look into even their own eyes in the mirror.
They should.
That's what is called as absence of self-knowledge in spirituality. Mm-hmm. We do not know who we are. Mm-hmm. We usually don't bother to peep into our own inner self because that hurts. There is, as you said, a mass of misery inside. Everything just beaten into pulp. That kind of hurt within. So we don't care to acknowledge our own inner state. Self-knowledge, Atmagyan. That's something that we desperately avoid. So we keep looking outwards. We gather a lot of external knowledge. We know about the world. We know about the continents. we know about the cosmos, we know about the origin of the universe, all cosmological stuff, we know about so much. We don't want to know how it is within. And if we could see what is there in our own eyes, as you said, just one look at the pig's eyes or the goat's eyes would suffice. Much the same thing is there, much the same thing. We are all united, not even united, we are all one at the level of the inner consciousness that suffers. We are all one. And that identification would immediately stop us from being cruel, because now me and that one are just one. Yeah. Being cruel to her is being cruel to myself. And that's probably the only way we can bring a conclusive end to this gory spectre of the per capita consumption in India, meat consumption in India, has risen incredibly over the last 10-15 years. And also the proportion of meat eaters. It's still among the lowest in the world, but it's rising very alarmingly. How does one address that? One has to address that by looking the whole thing in totality. As humanity, we are going down a slippery slope of consciousness. We are degrading in almost everything. You look at the quality of the output in arts, for example. Look at the state of philosophy or poetry. And you find when it comes to the products of consciousness, we are not really doing well, especially in the fields where self-knowledge is required. Science we are doing okay, technology we are doing great, but there we don't need self-knowledge. There we need knowledge of the world, not self-knowledge. In humanities one requires self-knowledge, and we aren't doing well there at all. Reduction of forest cover, all the COP summits and all, how they are going waste and how we are all just fooling ourselves in the name of doing something substantial towards the climate. And you realize all of that has a common center. And that common center is that we are just going blind towards ourselves. We are saying, we are suffering, we want to have a good time, let us have a good time. An inner state of drunkenness. I really wonder how veganism can succeed if the climate catastrophe is not addressed.
Right.
I wonder how veganism can succeed if the consumption binge is not addressed, or how veganism can succeed if the build-up of nuclear arsenals is not arrested. So we had the US and the USSR when I was young, and they had around 10,000 weapons each. And now China too is going to top 1,000 weapons. And obviously India and Pakistan and Israel can't be far behind. And Iran too is in the fray. And if Iran is there, then Saudi Arabia will want a deterrent of her own. And all of these things are related to animal welfare and animal rights. The connection does not seem obvious, obviously. You're saying, yes, the Russia and Ukraine are fighting, and how is that related to veganism? It is related to veganism. It is related to veganism. And all these problems that we are facing, they all have a common center. And that common center is human consciousness. We do not know who we are. We take ourselves to be these bodies, and we keep rushing after physical pleasure. And I have no problem with physical pleasure. It's just that it does not suffice. Not that it is evil.
Right.
It is simply stupid. Could physical pleasure give us lasting relief? I would be the first one to go after physical pleasure. It's just that it fails. And that's what is leading to all these things. I'm pretty sure, but let me just reel off a few numbers. The number of species of flora and fauna that are going extinct per day today is 10 times the natural rate. If you compare the number today to the number that we had a century earlier, it's 10 times. And even as we talk, even over the last 30 minutes or an hour, about a dozen species have gone extinct. That's the rate. How is that not related to veganism? Obviously it is. So unless we have that awareness, that sensitivity, that we are bringing ourselves to a 360-degree kind of destruction because of a central reason of self-ignorance, how will we manage to pluck ourselves out of this mess?
Yesterday I was at Bandipur National Park because there's an animal sanctuary next to it where I had to do some work. And I saw many animals, elephants, peacocks, langurs, and I also saw a tiger and a leopard. The leopard was very fast, couldn't see her that much, but I managed to see the tiger. And of course, you know, they're so rare. You're like, wow, what a beauty. And then I realized, well, driving into the forest, it's only that little patch of forest that she has. Everything else has been cut down. And most people don't realize that 45%, nearly half of the world's global surface area is now used for raising animals for meat, eggs, and dairy.
It's a very, very important statistic.
So there is a direct link. If you care, you know, so many people save the tiger, save the orangutan, you know, save the elephants. If you care about these animals, then you have to stop eating animals. Because all of the forests are being bulldozed down to make way for the animals people eat or the crops to feed them. And 1/3 of the world's cropland goes not to feeding ourselves,
human beings,
but to feed animals. 1/3. 1/3 of our freshwater resources goes into raising animals for meat, eggs, and dairy. Instead, we could consume these plants directly. We could address world hunger. And so there is an absolute direct link between the forest and the wild animals. I mean, most of the Amazon has been cut down purely for beef and leather. The Amazon provides us oxygen. So we are, if we're harming animals, we are directly harming ourselves.
Right. And that brings us to the flawed definition of development. What is development? Development for us, again, is something very material. You know, we measure GDP. If animals are feeling good, does that contribute to GDP? It does not. So why should animals be cared for? That does not contribute to GDP. If two people are in love, does that love contribute to GDP? It does not. So why should love be valued? If a person has self-knowledge and is sitting still, does that contribute to GDP? That does not. But if you hack down a jungle and instead start mining there, or build an industrial complex there, or cut a highway through the jungle, that contributes to GDP. And then the economists and the leaders can claim that there is progress of the material kind, and everybody can celebrate. This flawed concept of you see who we are and what we need is at the center of all our problems. We think we need development of the kind where we have more and more material affluence, no? And elections are won and lost on this plank. I gave you more, I gave you more. Now you have a shopping mall, now you have this, now you have that. The question is that what the individual really needs? In fact, so much is the care for material affluence that we are not caring even for physical things like healthcare. Having a shopping mall takes precedence over having a hospital, even though both pertain to the body, right? A shopping mall takes care of your physical needs, a hospital too does that. But the hospital does that in a more fundamental way. We don't even want to take care of hospitals, we are more concerned with shopping malls. That's our idea of development. And in that idea, animals have no space. Even human beings have no space. How can animals have space? We don't care even about ourselves. How will we care about animals? Had we known what we really want, our idea of development would have primarily meant inner awareness, inner fulfillment, taking care of the primary problem. The primary problem is within. It is not outside. It is not from bodies that we are weak or suffering. It is in the minds that we face weaknesses and suffering. That's the reason when we sleep, we might have had a miserable day. The moment we go to sleep, all our problems have vanished, right? Because it was the mind that was facing all the problems. But we don't want to acknowledge the place where the problem is. We instead keep treating it at places where the problem is not. It's so dramatic, no? Like searching for something at a place where it just is not. Or treating the wrong patient, not even the wrong disease. We have had so many jokes. When a person comes with a toothache and the stupid doctor starts treating the knee, and we all laugh at such jokes, don't we? But right now the problem is even more hilarious. I've gone to the doctor and the doctor has started treating you. Right. So that's the situation that we have today. We just don't want to acknowledge that it's the mind that has the problem, not the body. So any kind of pleasures that you supply to the body will not suffice. And the entire national, international discourse has to change. We have to figure out who we are as human beings. What is the definition of progress? When do we call ourselves a developed society? We call, for example, the US, let's say, a developed first world country, when it has one of the highest per capita meat consumption rates. Now, if we really were conscious people, would we call the US a developed country? We would say, no, it's a savage, a barbaric country. It's following a very primitive way of living. A very tribal and grotesque and bloody way of living. Why do we call that country a first world country? But we don't. Why? Because the US has, $15 trillion of GDP. and the biggest military complex, the highest number of nuclear weapons, and a lot of prowess, a lot of handle on everything that happens in the world. So, is that what we value? If we value all those things, we will be cruel to animals. Please understand. The same thing that makes us value the US will make us cruel towards the rabbit. What is it that we value? We value somebody's muscle power. We value somebody's ability to hurt us in retaliation. We value the amount of money somebody has, right? Obviously, the US has great universities as well, but then we hardly go there looking for knowledge. We go there looking for money and prosperity and power, and all of them incidentally come through knowledge. So we value the US because it's big and powerful and moneyed and violent. And for that same reason, we will never respect the rabbit, because it has no money, because it is small, because it cannot retaliate, and it has no influence even in the jungle. So if the US is to be respected, the rabbit has to be killed. Am I? So, are we raising our kids properly? What's our education system like? What are the values we are instilling our kids? What are we telling them? Because you can't raise a kid wrongly and then be successful in having her as a vegan. It will be very difficult to bring about that kind of conversion, if I may say. And we face that trouble daily. I'm sure you too. Somebody has been on a particular track for 25 years. It becomes difficult now. Not impossible. Obviously, we succeed, but there is a momentum that habit carries, right? And the ego is kind of enslaved to its past. Are we raising our kids rightly? Are we teaching them what to respect and what not to respect? Or are we just, for example, let me say, when I was a kid, in my textbooks, we would rank countries on 2 parameters. One was the countries with the biggest populations. So please tell us the top 5 countries by population. That would be a question in the examination, class 3 or 4 or 5. And by landmass. So the teacher would say, please tell us the top 5 countries by their area. So what are we teaching the kids to respect? Numbers and size. How will we respect the rabbit now?
And you know, what we teach kids is one thing, but we can learn a lot from our kids. Because you gave the example of the child who might urinate on the ants, but there's also so many children who say, you know, when they learn that there's an animal on their plate, they say, no,
yes,
what is this? I don't want to eat an animal.
Yes, yes.
You know, you see this in cases of animal sacrifice, where the child will protest
yes.
and say, no, please don't kill this goat, or please don't kill this chicken.
That's true.
And there is this inherent kindness, and sometimes we teach them to be cruel. We teach them to set aside that inherent kindness and to disregard it, whereas that's not the way that many kids naturally are. So I think there's a lot of times that we should actually listen to them. And about GDP, you know, you were mentioning, well, now we are we're reaping what we sowed, where we're realizing that the effects of climate change are having a massive effect on GDP and are projected to have a massive effect on GDP. So there goes all this so-called development that we were talking about. And we're learning the lesson that the environment is important, that animals are important. Even if we have to learn it economically, we're learning it. We're learning it the hard way. And the meat industry or the egg industry or the dairy industry will not tell you that they're such a major contributor to climate change, to the greenhouse gases that cause climate change. So much so that by some estimates, it's said that the meat, egg, and dairy industries contribute more greenhouse gases than the transport sector. So all planes, trucks, airplanes, ships combined. The water wastage. These are not things that they will tell you. Similarly, the meat, egg, and dairy industries, they use so much advertising power and so much strength to try to hide from people what they do behind closed doors. And so part of that bringing about a change, part of that awareness is showing people what actually happens. And that's something that we focus very heavily on trying to do, because most people are kind. Most people, like you say, if you ask them, they're never going to say, yes, I want to hurt a rabbit. Most people don't want to. But most people also don't really know what happens at the hands of these industries, because these industries will not want to tell you.
There's a bit of a spin there when it comes to the effect of climate change on GDP. The countries that would suffer the most are the ones with the lowest GDPs. Yeah. So the developed world will suffer, but proportionally way lesser than what a country like India or Pakistan would suffer. For example, the recent floods in Pakistan cost that country around 14% of its GDP. 14% is big. Nothing that happens in the US is going to cost the US 14% of its GDP. So what would happen? All countries would suffer, but some would suffer more than the others. So the power differential would only increase in favor of the developed world, which is the biggest polluter and the biggest contributor.
And they shift their pollution to
these
countries
They
like
dump it
India
here. Right.
and
Right.
Bangladesh
Right.
and the leather industry.
Right. So what would happen is that the loss in GDP argument would fall flat, because climate change contributing to a loss in GDP actually works in favor of the polluters, which is the developed world. So this argument is actually not going to work too much. That's what I'm afraid of. No argument is going to work. If we say, that GDP is important, and if you don't take care of GDP, then if you don't take care of climate change, then GDP would suffer. We are still agreeing to the fact that GDP is important and you must take care of the climate so that GDP is protected. This probably will not go far. We have to have not GDP but consciousness as the first thing. That's what I want to assert a bit. So I suppose just to intermittently conclude, we could probably just remind ourselves, reiterate to ourselves that we are in a deep inner and outer mess. Inwardly, we are facing the epidemic of mental health, which is the misery thing that you talked of. Because we are miserable, therefore today we are more depressed and more anxious than we ever were. Huge amount of data, public data, is there in our face to see that the levels of stress and anxiety that an average individual is facing today is many times higher than what even soldiers were facing a century back. So inwardly we are doing very badly, and outwardly we are in the 6th mass extinction phase. Average global temperatures have already risen by 1.5 degrees centigrade. From 280 ppm, we are talking of 450 ppm carbon dioxide now. Not only is the current situation bad, we are getting worse at an accelerating rate. Forget about climate emissions being reduced. They are just increasing. They are still increasing and increasing at an accelerating rate. And even if we are talking of going net zero, we are talking of 2050. And that's the net zero, not a reduction. That's just a net zero. And even that net zero, when you read between the lines, is quite deceptive. We are losing so many species every day. I mean, it's catastrophic, simply. Doomsday, inwardly and outwardly. All these problems are interrelated, and at the center of all these problems is the crisis in human consciousness. Veganism cannot be a direct solution, but veganism is something that would immediately happen when the crisis is resolved. So veganism would be a great symptom of inner improvement. Whereas if inwardly we remain who we are and yet try to push veganism, either we will not succeed greatly, or even if we succeed, the success would be just a bit superficial, because the person, I'm pretty sure you would be seeing a lot of people like those, vegan and yet not the right person, vegan and yet cruel towards animals in very indirect ways. I for example, talk of people who say they are vegan and yet decide to have 2 or 3 kids. And we very well know that the greatest danger to forests and animals today is the explosion in human population. So you decide that you will not have a chicken on your plate, but you have had kids, and numerous kids, and they will require roads and hospitals and schools and shopping malls and everything else and lots of industries. Further, the kids you have produced will procreate further. One kid being born today is actually death sentence to lakhs of animals. No, that kind of veganism hardly helps. That's a veganism without a shift in center. And when that shift in center, the center of human consciousness, when that shift in center happens, then veganism is a natural, smooth, organic result. So that's what we are looking at, and when we probably look at veganism that way, it becomes easier to bring others on board. Because now we are not talking only about animals, we are talking about everything in the world, including the welfare of the very person we are talking to. Else it's a discussion on, I am okay, you are okay. The poor goat is not okay, she is being slaughtered. I am okay, you are okay. The poor rabbit is not okay because her fur are being exploited. Or she is being taken to a research lab and all kinds of vicious experiments. But we too are okay, both of us are okay. It's the animal world that needs to be taken care of. No, I think the approach has to be, we are not okay. And if we have killed an animal, the animal has actually gone. We are left to live and suffer. We are not okay. We are not okay. We are not okay both inwardly and outwardly. And the treatment therefore has to be within. Otherwise, Otherwise, the kind of atrocity we are heaping on everybody is incredible.
Yes, and what's, as you were talking, I was thinking that eating vegan can almost be thought of as a medicine, a daily medicine for self-improvement, because it's something that you choose to do every day, 2-3 times a day, what you put in your body. And so it is part of your journey of this self-improvement that you talk about.
Wonderful. And a reminder, when you take in vegan food, it's also a reminder that we are in a crisis and much, much more needs to be done. So a daily reminder 2 times or 3 times, because we are indeed at a special moment in history when we are facing a catastrophe like never before. And veganism is an important front, very, very important front in that struggle. However, the center of that struggle is human consciousness. I think we'll need to talk repeatedly about it, and we'll need to have many more such conversations, and many more must follow after this.
Yes. It's been wonderful speaking to you today.
Thank you so much.